This is a real alert, folks. We are living through one of the most significant constitutional showdowns of our lifetime. And if you care about freedom, if you care about the Second Amendment, you need to pay attention right now. What just happened may determine whether the President of the United States truly has authority over federal agencies, or whether unelected officials can entrench themselves as a fourth branch of government. That question does not just touch the economy. It touches every right you and I hold dear, including the right to keep and bear arms. Here is the situation. President Donald Trump has announced that he is firing Lisa Cook, a sitting governor of the Federal Reserve System. He says she engaged in mortgage fraud, that she misrepresented her residence on loan documents, and that this misconduct is grounds for removal. She says he has no legal authority to remove her. She claims the Federal Reserve is independent, insulated from presidential control, and that she cannot be touched. That dispute is not merely about one woman's job. It is about whether the Federal Reserve itself is constitutional. If it stands outside the executive branch, then what is it? If it stands beyond accountability, then what else might be placed there? And if unelected bureaucrats can wall off entire domains of American life from presidential authority, what happens to the guarantees of the Bill of Rights, including the Second Amendment? The Federal Reserve System is not some obscure agency. It controls monetary policy, printing money, setting interest rates, influencing inflation, and therefore shaping the cost of gas, the price of food, the mortgage you pay on your home, and yes, even the ability of ordinary citizens to exercise their freedoms. Because when inflation soars and when rates climb, working families find it harder to buy what they need, harder to maintain independence, harder to save for retirement. Freedom is not just theoretical. It is lived day by day, dollar by dollar. A government body that controls the value of every dollar in your wallet wields incredible power over your liberty. And liberty, folks, includes the liberty guaranteed by the Second Amendment. This is why we cannot dismiss the fight over the Federal Reserve as an abstract economic debate. The Founding Fathers designed a constitution with three branches: Congress to write laws, the President to enforce laws, and the courts to interpret them. That is it. Nowhere in the Constitution do you find a clause creating an independent financial empire with 23,000 employees operating outside presidential oversight. And yet that is what we face. If the courts accept that they are accepting a government beyond the Constitution, and if they accept that, then nothing prevents them from treating your right to keep and bear arms the same way as something to be managed by insulated technocrats rather than protected as a core guarantee. Think about the web of the Constitution. Pull on one strand and the entire web shakes. If you redefine presidential power in relation to the Federal Reserve, you redefine the structure of the entire system. That ripple touches the Second Amendment, because the same judges who say the president cannot control the Fed may tomorrow say Congress can invent new powers that burden your right to carry. Once the precedent is set that the government can create powers or agencies outside the constitutional design, there is no limit to how far it can stretch. And once the web is distorted, every freedom is vulnerable. So understand this: the battle over Lisa Cook is not just about a single official. It is about whether the president still holds executive power or whether that power has been diluted by agencies that claim independence. It is about whether the Constitution means what it says or whether we allow a silent fourth branch to emerge. And if we allow that, then you better believe the consequences will reach your firearms, your ammunition, and your ability to stand as a free citizen. Because when unelected officials can dictate economics without accountability, they can eventually dictate rights without restraint. This is why patriots must watch carefully. The conflict we are witnessing did not appear out of nowhere. The question of whether Congress can create a central bank has been argued since the very earliest days of the Republic. Alexander Hamilton pushed for the first Bank of the United States, insisting that a national financial institution was necessary to stabilize the young nation's credit. Farmers and agrarians opposed him fiercely, fearing domination by Eastern bankers who could manipulate interest rates to their own advantage. That tension between centralized financial power and individual liberty has never disappeared. It resurfaces every generation, and in our time it has erupted again in the form of the Federal Reserve. For more than a century, the Federal Reserve has operated as a hybrid entity, not fully private, not fully public, but always powerful. It prints the money, sets the interest rates, and decides whether the economy grows or contracts. That influence reaches into every home in America. When mortgage rates climb, families cannot afford to buy houses. When the cost of credit rises, small businesses close their doors. And when ordinary Americans are squeezed financially, the ability to live freely to support their families, and yes, to purchase the firearms that secure their safety, is undermined. Economic power is political power. and political power always collides with constitutional rights. Consider what happened in September 2024. Just weeks before the presidential election, the Federal Reserve under Jerome Powell slashed interest rates by 50 basis points. That single decision injected life into the stock market and gave the appearance of economic momentum during the final stretch of the Biden-Harris administration. Then, after Donald Trump returned to the presidency, Powell refused to lower rates despite mounting pressure. Every tick upward in those rates forces the government to pay more on its massive debt. And every tick upward forces ordinary Americans to pay more on their loans, on their credit cards, on their car payments. A selective approach to interest rates has political consequences, and it shows why the Fed is never truly independent of politics. It is merely unaccountable. This is the context in which Trump moved to remove Lisa Cook. The argument is not about personalities. It is about whether the president has authority to oversee a body that affects every facet of national life. If the answer is no, then we admit that an unelected group of financial elites may control the economy without check or balance. That would represent not just a distortion of the separation of powers, but an outright invention of a fourth branch of government. And if such a branch can exist, then why could Congress not one day create an independent firearms commission with power to regulate your Second Amendment rights beyond the reach of any elected president? That is the slippery slope. If constitutional design is ignored for money, it can be ignored for guns. The stakes are clear. Economic sovereignty and personal sovereignty are bound together. A nation that tolerates unaccountable rule over its currency will soon tolerate unaccountable rule over its freedoms. Patriots cannot afford to dismiss this as a technical debate. It is the front line of the same battle that has always defined America: who governs and whether the rights of the people remain supreme. The legal battle that is about to unfold will center on two questions. First, can the President of the United States remove a governor of the Federal Reserve for cause if there is evidence of misconduct? Second, if the President cannot, then what exactly is the Federal Reserve under our constitutional structure? Those questions will not be confined to the careers of individuals. They will define the limits of executive power and, by extension, the meaning of the Constitution itself. When Donald Trump declared Lisa Cook fired, he did so under Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 2 vests all executive power in one person, the president. That authority has always included the ability to remove officials in the executive branch when there is cause. Presidents fire cabinet secretaries, agency heads, and ambassadors. No one questions that power. The only reason this fight is unusual is that the Federal Reserve claims to be insulated. Cook and her allies argue that the Fed is an independent entity immune to removal. But if that claim is accepted, then the Fed has become something new. Something not authorized by the Constitution. It would be a fourth branch of government unmentioned by the founders, unaccountable to voters, and unreachable by the president. And once that principle is accepted, every constitutional right becomes more fragile. Chief Justice John Roberts and the Supreme Court will likely become the final arbiters. Roberts is known to care deeply about structural questions of separation of powers. If the court embraces the view that only three branches exist, then the Federal Reserve must either be treated as part of the executive branch subject to presidential control or be deemed unconstitutional altogether. If the court accepts the idea of a fourth branch, then the precedent would shake the entire balance of the Constitution. Once again, think of the web: pull one strand and all the others move. And if one strand allows the creation of power beyond the text, then another strand, the Second Amendment, will one day be stretched and distorted in the same way. Imagine the precedent. If Congress can create an unaccountable financial empire, why not create an unaccountable agency to manage firearms? Why not claim that such a body is independent beyond the president, beyond voters, and therefore free to dictate rules that erode the right to bear arms, if the courts accept that the Second Amendment could be neutralized not by repeal, but by bureaucratic construction? That is the danger. The fight over Lisa Cook may look financial, but the implications reach every gun safe in America. Economic control is already political control. The Fed raises rates, and families struggle to buy ammunition to pay for firearms to maintain independence. The Fed lowers rates before elections, and markets surge in ways that favor one party over another. Independence in theory becomes manipulation in practice, and manipulation of economics always leads to manipulation of rights. A free people must never allow liberty to hinge on the discretion of unelected elites. That is why this case matters to every patriot who believes in the Second Amendment. Trump's move has forced the issue. For decades, the question of the Fed's constitutionality has been left unresolved. Courts offered passing remarks, politicians avoided direct confrontation, and the institution grew larger and stronger. But with one declaration of termination, the president has forced the matter into the open. Either the court affirms his authority and restores the constitutional chain of accountability, or it accepts the idea of a government outside the Constitution. There is no middle ground. And on that outcome depends not just on monetary policy, but the integrity of every right enumerated in the Bill of Rights. This is not a sideshow. This is the heart of the constitutional order. Patriots who cherish freedom must see that the battle lines are not only about interest rates or debt payments, they are about whether the Constitution means what it says. If it does, then the Second Amendment remains safe under its shield. If it does not, then that shield will be pierced and the right to bear arms will be left vulnerable to bureaucratic erosion. Watch carefully, folks. The lawsuit over Lisa Cook is going to shape the future of American liberty. It will test whether we still have three branches of government or whether we have allowed a shadow fourth branch to grow unchecked. It will test whether the courts have the courage to enforce the separation of powers or whether they will permit an institution to stand outside the constitutional frame. And it will test whether our freedoms, including the right to keep and bear arms, remain protected by a living constitution or are surrendered to an unaccountable elite. Stay alert, stay engaged, and never forget that every strand of the web touches the Second Amendment.